Thank you, and hello, everyone. Welcome to our ACLU Leadership Forum. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Deborah Archer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the president of the ACLU. And this is our first leadership forum since Donald Trump took office last month. And really, what a dizzying and depressing month it's been in so many ways. But I couldn't be more proud of the ACLU and the way that we have shown up over the last several weeks, and so proud of our leaders across the country and proud of the leaders we've assembled today for being clear-eyed, prepared, responsive, and fearless. Our goal for today is to break away from the headlines a little bit and talk about what kind of affirmative work is possible in the states through the ACLU's Firewall for Freedom strategy. We can't just fight back, of course, we also have to push forward. And during this conversation, we'll define the limits of Trump's power and discuss the real power that state and local actors like attorneys general hold to protect our freedoms and our communities and deepen and expand the protection of civil rights and civil liberties. But we also recognize that we have received a flood of questions about Trump's first actions. So we're going to start there with the ACLU's truly impressive defensive work, 11 lawsuits and counting, and over 40 Freedom of Information Act requests that help us ensure transparency and accountability. So we'll talk about that before digging into the affirmative work. And for today's discussion, I'm grateful to be joined by three ACLU experts. First, we have Nahal Zamani, Director of State Campaigns for the ACLU's National Political Advocacy Department. We also have with us Amol Sinha, Executive Director of the ACLU of New Jersey, and JJ Straight, the ACLU's National Campaigns Director for Reproductive Rights. Before we jump in, I'd like to remind everyone that this is an off-the-record conversation. So if you're a journalist among us, welcome. We're so happy that you're here. But please note that nothing said here is for attribution or for citation. We want to share information, but we also want this conversation to be open and for people to feel free to join in the discussion. We have reserved time at the end for questions, and you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we are going to get to as many questions as we can. So with that, let's get started. I know our focus is on firewalls for freedom, but it's important, I think, to ground our conversation. We received a lot of thoughtful pre-submitted questions about Trump's and his allies' power, likely based on the timing of our invitation. We received quite a few about the so-called Department of Government Efficiency as well. So Nahal, I want to start with you. I know you are in our political advocacy department, but can I ask you to do a little bit of double duty for us and speak to the ACLU's litigation and advocacy responses to what I think all of us agree is unprecedented attacks on our civil rights and our civil liberties coming out of the administration over the past month?
Course, and happy to be here. So the ACLU is taking three important steps to ensure that the Trump administration and Musk's or Department of Government Efficiency or DOGE operate with transparency, oversight, and adherence to the Constitution and federal law. First, we worked to expose this massive privacy invasion. Within days that we learned that DOGE had gained access to the government's most tightly protected databases and systems, which are in violation of longstanding privacy safeguards, which are mandated by Congress, we filed FOIA requests with dozens of federal agencies, including Health and Human Services and the FBI. The reason is that the American people deserve to know what's happening behind closed doors and how their private, their financial, medical, and personnel records are being illegally accessed and analyzed. Second, we pushed Congress to act. Earlier this month, we urged Congress to conduct critical oversight of DOGE and its unchecked access to Americans' data. Third, we mobilized thousands of ACLU supporters to call their House representatives and demand this greater protection against federal funding freezes, firings, and privacy breaches. Nearly 150,000 people have participated in our call to action. We'll be paying close attention in the coming weeks, especially as we receive responses to those federal requests for information. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that concerns around Musk and Doge are tapping into fears about government or pseudo government actors who don't play by the rules and then may be able to evade accountability. So, what do you say to someone who asks about litigation as a viable tool? There are also widespread concerns about our ability to enforce the rule of law, even if a positive court decision comes down through the litigation. What does enforcement look like? What are their tools to evade enforcement?
So first, I want to name drop our executive director, Anthony Romero, who gave this amazing interview earlier this month on the New Yorker Radio Hour podcast. He reminded us that in 2016, the ACLU had won a criminal contempt court against the Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio and his top deputies for repeatedly violating court orders to stop racially profiling Latinos as part of unlawful enforcement operations against immigrants. In 2018, a federal judge had found the Kansas Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, in contempt of court for repeatedly violating orders involving voting rights lawsuits that were brought against him by the ACLU. We're going to be sharing that link to the New Yorker interview, and I love it. And I love it because Anthony Romero says the Rubicon, and it is one of the most engaging phrases that you'll hear. But what the core information, the core issue here is access to our information, right? And it's critical that we defend our privacy from attacks from President Trump and other harmful actors. So this most recent overreach, which is accessing critical systems at various federal agencies, what we're seeing is harmful. And we do not want the precious and necessary checks and balances that define our democracy to be defeated. We're also not surprised. I will say Trump and his allies and his colleagues are doing exactly what we thought that they would do, we expected them to do. We expected them to attack these critical systems of our government in ways that really raise profound concerns around our civil liberties and the future of our democracy. But on our side is the law. There are congressionally mandated protections for Americans' privacy. And despite whatever it's going to post on X, the Trump administration actually has to follow court orders. And I'll say that, we haven't yet seen open defiement, and that's a real critical moment. If the Trump administration does defy court orders, we are going to use all of our tools at our disposal, including civil contempt, criminal contempt against everyone other than the president, and eventually political accountability via impeachment or elections. So the president might have relative immunity, but others do not. And holding elected officials in contempt isn't new for us. I'll just add, I've spent my whole career at really great organizations like the ACLU, and it's not just about winning lawsuits. It's about implementing those wins. It's about the ways that we uphold our Constitution and we stay in the long fight to make sure that our wins are protected and also meaningfully implemented, however long it takes.
Absolutely. I appreciate that last piece as well. And I thank you for grounding the conversation for us. I think of all the questions I've gotten over the past week, the most popular, most frequent question has been around what can we do and what do we do if Trump refuses to comply with court orders. And as you confirmed, litigation has been and will continue to be central to our theory of change. And despite concerns around the federal judiciary and its willingness to enforce the Constitution, its willingness to enforce our laws, there's a path for progress in courts to challenge these truly hateful and cruel executive orders and other actions, a path to protect our fundamental freedoms, and a path to enforce the rulings and to enforce our laws. So I appreciate that. Amol and JJ, I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves and then to share a bit of the landscape that you're dealing with. Can you let everyone know where you sit within the ACLU and share what you're seeing in your community or in the communities that you serve and work with now that Trump is in office? We understand how widespread the harms and damage has been and how widespread it will be. But we also know that it will look and feel different from community to community.
Uh, Thanks so much, Deborah. I'm really grateful to be here, and thank you to everybody that had a part in putting this together. So my name is Amol Sinha. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director at the ACLU of New Jersey. As folks may know, the ACLU is a nationwide organization with 54 affiliates across the country. And one of the unique features of our organization, perhaps our greatest strength, is that we have boots on the ground in every single state across the country. So what's happening on the ground here in New Jersey is in many ways what's happening across the country. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty right now. And I'm hearing from community members across the state, including members of the public and advocacy organization leaders and nonprofit and philanthropy leaders and donors and the media and unions and educators and university folks and even government stakeholders who are all fearful about the ways in which the Trump administration may impact them across a number of fronts. People are worried about their privacy, as Nahal pointed out. They're worried about their rights and freedoms wholesale. They're worried about the state of our democracy, about their livelihoods, about their loved ones. From fearing about their transgender family members to worrying about federal funding cuts, the rollback of DEI initiatives to gutting the federal government and attacking nonprofit organizations, and so much more. People are understandably living in a state of worry about what's next. I'll focus for a moment on immigrants' rights. Of course, we know and we knew that attacking immigrant community members was going to be priority number one for Trump. He said so during his campaign, and what we saw during the first Trump administration, including family separation and kids in cages as policy priorities, we've of course heard all of these things come to fruition and perhaps happening again. We've heard of all of the executive orders that are happening, at the national level, including attacking birthright citizenship and shutting down asylum at the border, targeting people for expedited removal, and more. Here in New Jersey, as with parts all across the country, we've seen an increase in the number of reports of ICE in our community, including a raid right here in Newark where several people were arrested. We're hearing frequent reports of ICE going into workplaces and businesses and in knocking on doors and homes. We're also seeing attempts to increase immigration detention in our state, including by repurposing existing facilities for ICE detention. And as the Trump administration has sort of rescinded the sensitive locations memo, which once protected certain spaces like churches, we're seeing fear that people won't have safe spaces anymore. And that's perhaps the point. They want families to be afraid to send their kids to school. They want families to be afraid to go to church or to go to work or to seek emergency care. They want people to live in constant states of fear and despair. But I'm grateful to be at the ACLU right now because, as I've told my team here, preparation and community are the antidotes to despair. For well over a year before the election, we planned across this nationwide organization, and we are prepared for what was to come. And that's why on day one, we fired off the first lawsuit on birthright citizenship. And since then, we filed lawsuit after lawsuit challenging the administration's onslaught of injustice. And as Anthony Romero has said in the past, we're not simply here to observe the atrocities. We're here to take action. And I'm so proud that our organization has been able to pivot from preparation to action in a moment's notice starting on January 20th.
Wow, thank you, Amal. My name is JJ Straight. I am the National Campaigns Director at our National Office for Reproductive Freedom. And I'm also working as an interim director while we find a new awesome National Campaigns Director for Trans Justice with that team as well. And I want to echo my thanks for everyone who pulled this moment together. It's moments like this that are actually going to drive us towards change. So I wanted to kind of follow up a little bit and dig a little bit deeper into some of the things, echoing what Amal has said about just the Trump administration, absolutely from day one, looking to drive fear, division, and really going after certain fragile communities, including the transgender community, where on day one and in the subsequent days following, we saw the Trump administration take multiple actions by executive order and rescinding previous orders aimed at the transgender community, from their service in the military to defining sex, but having a federal definition of sex assigned at birth, and taking away gender-affirming healthcare. So essentially inserting the federal government into our private healthcare decisions and blocking folks from being able to get fundamental healthcare across the nation. And as you have heard, we are absolutely pursuing every possible avenue to stand up to the Trump administration, including filing lawsuits and coming together to really stand in defiance of these egregious actions. I want to highlight that when we think about the work of trans justice and certainly the abortion justice work that we're doing, I want to look at a little bit of that intersectionality. We know that whenever governments have tried to strip the freedoms of our vulnerable communities, there have been people like us defying them. And we know that these political attacks on transgender people are connected to the Trump administration's efforts at censorship, division, and hate. These are collective efforts to divide us of how we look, how we sound, how we pray, and if and when and how we decide to start a family. And we know that just like we have seen since the Dobbs decision, this insertion into our private medical decisions is certainly part of a larger effort by both the Trump administration and by some members of Congress to expand their reach into our private lives and our private decisions. And as we have seen Trump take multiple actions on immigration and executive orders on trans justice and dividing us, we're also making sure we are watching attentively to what he has said he's going to do or not do on abortion. We know that the Trump, as when he was a candidate before he was sworn in as president, he actually said multiple times to the American people that he would not take further action at the federal level on abortion. However, we just saw his new director of Department of Health and Human Services sworn in, and within the first week, we've heard multiple conversations that he's having that he wants to study, quote unquote, study the safety of mifepristone. Mifepristone is one of the medications used for medication abortion, which is now well above a majority of the abortions in this country. It has been on the market for 25 years. It has over 100 peer-studied reviews that talk about its safety. So we know that this is a safe and effective medicine, and that this study is a herring for like them looking at chipping away at our rights. And you can be rest assured that we will be sending a clear message to the Trump administration that we expect him to uphold his promises to the American people on abortion, and we will stand together if we see any further erosion of that access in this United States. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you both. As Amol said, it is so important to hear about the work that the ACLU is doing. In these times, it has been incredible comfort to be a part of an organization that is showing up and standing up in the way that it has. But it's also important for us to always stop and take a beat to acknowledge how these attacks on already vulnerable communities, attacks on marginalized communities, are beyond cruel and inhumane. And we do have to call it what it is. They are about erasing communities that don't conform to traditional white patriarchal standards. It's about enforcing and advancing white supremacy in every way that they can. It is about a campaign to resegregate and to divide us. But when they come for one member of our community, they do come for all of us. So as JJ said, the attacks on trans people is really a canary in the coal mine. We have no other choice but to fight back and to fight back together. So thank you all for that work and speaking about it with us. And of course, the states have a powerful role to play to stand up against Trump. So Nahal and Amol, I'm going to ask you to stick with me to dig into what we call the Firewalls for Freedom strategy. But JJ, please do not go far. We've got a lot of questions for you that were submitted in advance. about the attacks and the many ways that we can all get involved and help. So we'll be back to you soon. Nahal. So there's this perception that Trump holds a lot of power, which he does. The office of the president is a powerful position, but that there are other centers of power, especially at the state level. And how is the ACLU engaging and leveraging those other power centers?
So I'm so excited to talk about one of the efforts that has occupied much of my time in partnership, in fact, with Amol and other affiliate leaders across the country, the Firewall for Freedom campaign. That is our groundbreaking campaign that upholds our civil liberties and our civil rights at the local and state level. I feel like we are one of the best organizations to meet this moment. We are a national organization with 54 brilliant affiliates. And we want to ensure that despite Trump's power, states do not have to voluntarily assist in violating and attacking our civil rights and civil liberties. This campaign first started last year. We first focused on 17 Dem trifecta states. These were states where their leaders were holding office, and we felt, given the history of previous state actors, especially against the abuses of the Trump administration in the first time that he was president, they would be crucial. I'm so excited to say that we are now, after working with over 25 states that are working, including states that are red but have blue cities, who are just ready and poised to act. What we're doing is we're urging state and local governments to enact policies that make it clear that they will not volunteer their resources or our private data with the federal government when the federal government seeks to violate our rights. So that includes protecting us from mass deportations, to ensuring our access to reproductive and gender affirming healthcare, to also ensuring that all residents, wherever they live, have their protected and fundamental rights ensured. I'm really excited just to share that just in the last few weeks alone, we've won a number of things. Earlier this month, the State Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, issued an advisory opinion prohibiting state and local law enforcement from holding people in jail for the sole purpose of handing them over to federal immigration authorities. Related to the issue of immigration, another attorney general, the previous month in January, the Attorney General of New Mexico released a guidance on immigration enforcement in response to Trump's executive order that had rescinded longstanding federal protections for sensitive locations, and that means schools, churches, hospitals, and courthouses. And the AG in New Mexico called out this change in policy and reiterated the need for local leaders to understand their rights and their responsibilities at the intersection of state and federal law. That is exactly what the Firewall campaign is devoted to. I'm excited also to share that the governor of North Carolina announced an executive order that is sweeping. It protects reproductive rights. And also that month, another governor, the Washington state governor, announced an executive order that would create a task force to examine protections for reproductive rights. And to my home state, New Jersey, where Amol is active, the New Jersey governor there also announced that he would be stockpiling abortion medications. So we are seeing across the country legislation, executive actions being passed by people in elected office who know that they need to protect their residents and their communities from unlawful violations of their rights. And it's not just the firewall actions that we can take credit for. We're actually seeing how everybody is using this larger mandate, this responsibility, and this necessity so that elected officials are meeting this moment. So every time I hear a state attorney general is filing lawsuits or issuing a guidance, I know that we are standing up and building a robust set of firewalls around this country.
Great. So you've mentioned a lot of issues in quite a few states. There's so much going on, and our work really does cover the waterfront on civil rights and civil liberties. But where do you see us making the most impact?
I think it's across these biggest issues, including immigration, the right to protest, the right to freely assemble, reproductive rights, as well as keeping the military out of domestic law enforcement. We've already seen that impact, right? We've seen state attorneys general sue en masse over birthright. expedited removal. In another case, we saw a restraining order against the anti-trans medical care executive action. So we really situate these firewall actions within a larger spectrum of policy actions. And we're trying to work to scale that up across the country. So our team is working across these numbers of issues in the very communities with the affiliates who are standing up and ensuring that their elected officials are protecting our communities.
Amol, I know that you are doing this work, and you and your team in the New Jersey affiliate are working closely with an array of leaders in New Jersey. Which state actors do you view as key to building firewalls in New Jersey that may translate into other states? And how does the ACLU work in coalition with them?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And Nahal, I'm so proud that you're in New Jersey. And, look, I am incredibly proud to be at the ACLU, and I'm just as proud to be a New Jerseyan in this moment right now. States like New Jersey have been on the front lines of protecting our rights for time immemorial. Like, we don't wait for rights to be handed down from Washington, D.C. We're on a mission right now. I have a personal mission and a chip on my shoulder to make New Jersey the strongest firewall in the nation. And we've built up incredible trust. We don't do this work alone. We built up incredible trust with our state leaders, and that includes our governor and our attorney general and members of our legislature. And look, I'll be real, we sue the state, right? Like, so we're both adversarial when we need to be. We'll stand up for our rights and be honest brokers. And we're also collaborative when we can find common ground where our values align. Which in New Jersey, thankfully, for the past several years, has been more often than not. We get to work together towards protecting the rights of all New Jerseyans. And I want to shout out our Attorney General for a second, Matt Platkin, who is a good friend, and he has filed several lawsuits against the Trump administration already. For instance, the day after we filed our lawsuit on birthright citizenship, Attorney General Platkin led a group of 18 states in filing a suit against the Trump administration on birthright citizenship as well. And he talked about in his litigation the administrative costs of ending birthright citizenship and what that would do to the states. I think that's a really important point to be making. And he said over and over that he's not going to be bullied by the Trump administration, which is threatening states that are trying to protect immigrant community members. States, as we all know, cannot be forced to do the federal government's dirty work. And I'm proud that our state gets it. And just as ACLU affiliates across the country are strategizing and working together, so are attorneys general. We're fortunate in New Jersey to have open lines of communication with our AG, and we get to do a lot together, including collaborating on policy. And I know that my colleagues in other states across the country enjoy similar relationships with their government actors. ACLU affiliates are credible and trusted. And oftentimes we are the idea generators for state and local government. And in states where governments are currently emboldened by the Trump administration and are hostile to civil rights and liberties, our affiliates, and I'm thinking about Florida right now and a number of other states who have fantastic executive directors, our affiliates serve as the moral compass, the constant watchdog. The folks that people rely on to fight back, and we're stepping up to the plate each and every time.
Right. Clearly, there's a lot of power and potential in the states, and it shows why one of our superpowers as an organization is our reach across this country. And in many, many ways, the nature of the fight in red states is clear. It's not easy, but at least the fight is clear. We did receive several pre-submitted questions asking what blue states can do in this moment. And to jump to that question, because we're here talking about it, Catherine specifically asked, what can we do to protect immigrants in Massachusetts? Amol, sticking with you, can you share some of New Jersey's proactive work and where the state is doubling down?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I'm very proud that since the first Trump administration, New Jersey has taken a number of proactive steps to protect all people here. Look, New Jersey is one of the most welcoming states for immigrant communities. We're one of the most diverse states in the country, and we have one of the greatest proportions of immigrants in the country as a percentage of our population. We've done things like enacting driver's licenses for all, regardless of immigration status. We have in-state tuition for people who are undocumented. We've prohibited the renewals of detention center contracts with our county jails. We have something called the Immigrant Trust Directive, which is a policy by the Attorney General that limits law enforcement contact with federal immigration enforcement. We have a budget line for deportation defense in New Jersey. And today is our governor's budget address. I would have been there if I wasn't here. And he hopefully will be expressing more support for deportation defense right now because we know we need it. But we have more to do. And we're working together to try to pass something called the Immigrant Trust Act, which would further ensure that local resources aren't used for federal immigration enforcement. There are a number of other issue areas, including abortion, where New Jersey has one of the strongest codifications of abortion rights in the country. And it's declared a fundamental constitutional right for anyone present in New Jersey, not just New Jersey residents, anyone present in New Jersey. And the governor, as Nahal mentioned, recently announced that the state would stockpile mifepristone, the abortion drug. But we have more to do on that front as well, including ensuring abortion access for all. By eliminating copays for people who can't afford an abortion and making sure that everybody that needs one can get one. And New Jersey is also a sanctuary state for gender affirming care, where both patients and providers are protected. So we're doing a lot on that front. And related to all of the issues that I just mentioned, we're advocating for policies that would embrace what I'm calling data minimization. Basically, the idea is that if a state agency doesn't need to collect certain pieces of data on its residents, then it probably shouldn't. For instance, we may not need to know people's immigration status for most services that a state provides. We may not need to know somebody's gender identity to sign up for a pool pass, right? Like, so there are things out there that that we can be smart about and logical about, and that's consistent with the Constitution and what states' rights are in this moment. And these are things that other firewall states are doing as well. I know the NYCLU has a campaign to pass New York for All, which would limit state resources from being used for immigration enforcement. And there are a number of other models out there from other affiliates across the country, and we all learn from each other constantly. And so we're going to implement the best practices possible moving forward.
Well, thank you for that answer. And more importantly, thank you for choosing us over the governor. And we appreciate it. As far as red states go, we also received several questions about the path forward. Elizabeth asked about Georgia, where the legislature is solidly red. And Elaine asked about what can be done in red states with governors who support Trump. Nahal, can you speak to what red states and purple states, or just other states that are perceived as more hostile to civil rights and civil liberties, can do?
So I wanted to start by saying that actually most of the states in the United States are perceived in their official leadership by being hostile to civil rights and civil liberties, but that's not actually the truth in terms of what constituents and residents want in terms of their values. And I think about the Firewall campaign. What's so effective about the Firewall campaign is we actually designed municipal or city level policies that can still be passed even when state legislatures might be more hostile to civil rights and civil liberties in terms of their records. I'm struck that the first executive action that came out, a firewall executive action, happened in North Carolina. And it is a sweeping action that protects reproductive freedoms. That is a wonderful story of what are the priorities of the residents in that state and the brave, courageous work by the governor there. How we are approaching these states, which we think of as the frontline states, is really going to be the focus for the next whole year and beyond. And we're also really cognizant of what is the larger picture. We know that retaliations by the Trump administration against elected officials is a real concern. And many elected officials are really concerned that their singular actions will lead to retaliation, including the withholding of federal funds or other types of targeting by the Trump administration. So our work is to respond to that threat and address that threat. One, we want to ensure cohesive leadership by a spectrum of elected officials across political backgrounds who are working to uphold our civil liberties and our civil rights. And we want to ensure that these elected officials hold the line. We also want to work to make sure that members of Congress do not support retaliatory measures, including financial ramifications, on their states. These members should not be voting against the interests of their communities. We at the ACLU are one of the very few organizations that are structured to be able to do this in a comprehensive way, and it's going to be the biggest fight that we have.
Yeah. Thank you, both of you, for giving us a sense of the landscape in the states, how we're fighting back, and really how we're doing it as a united front. I'd like to give you all a break, and I'd like to bring JJ back in to talk about our organizing and advocacy efforts. But please stay close by, because we're going to circle back to you during our Q&A. So JJ, we received a lot of questions from folks wanting to know how they can help the LGBTQ and transgender community specifically. I think some of the attacks here have really been the most heartbreaking. Barbara asked about protecting LGBTQ people, and Dee asked what the average citizen can do to help strengthen access to gender affirming care. And they really are just two of the many, many people who feel like they want to do something, something to help support members of this community and to fight back. So what can you share with us about what people can do?
Well, first of all, Barbara and Dee, I love that question because it just shows that folks are ready to push back on these egregious attacks. And I have to say, to be honest with you all, I have been hearing this question over and over again, whether it's all the folks who've been coming to our Know Your Rights trainings that we've been having, or in my day-to-day organizing life. And we want to assure people that even with the bombardment of what we've seen from the Trump administration and from Congress, this is certainly the point. The point of this kind of like full frontal attack on all of our civil liberties is really meant to stop us from taking action, but we're not. We're standing up. And so there are so many things that individuals can do, and that frankly, we can do collectively to ensure that we are sending a loud and strong collective message to our elected officials and those in power that we expect them to stand up. As Nahal talked about in North Carolina, we know that often the administration is completely out of sync with where the American people actually are and what our priorities are. So it's important that we are constantly sending a really strong message to our elected officials that we expect them to be in line with us as their constituents, and to look how they can also, as we've seen across these firewall states, stand up proactively as well. So the first thing I would be remiss to not mention, being with all of you wonderful people today, is that it's really important for you to sign up for ACLU's People Power. That is because this is where you will get information from our teams, and in conjunction with the work that we're doing in states with our affiliates, on the different myriad of ways that we can continually take action, both in rapid response moments, and also sign up for our amazing trainings and other ways that we can be involved. I think we're making sure we put that in the chat and spread the word. People power is really what we are doing to stand up across these issues. And I want to also say, sometimes we discount that the power of ourselves as messengers. And I often am amazed about how powerful we can be with just our inner circle. One of the most important things we can actually do in this moment is to have multiple conversations with those closest to us. I always like to say, pull out your phone, pull up your favorites, and think of all of the folks that are close to you that you maybe haven't had conversations about this, or maybe you've talked over it generally or seen an article or something like that. Take those opportunities to really educate and talk about why this is important to you. Think about the next time you go to your book club or to church. Think about the different ways that you are interacting with your inner circle, and how we can ask them to join us in this moment. We know from years and years of studying it, and frankly from personal experience, that the most influential way that we have seen to get folks to take action in person is in person, and by someone they know and trust. You have much more power than you know to start with that inner circle, to start with your family and friends, your coworkers, and grow this moment and grow this movement. Barbara, I wanted to think through, and Dee, even what compelled you to ask those questions of what can I do? I want you to take that exact energy and tell your friends and family why it is critical to you that you need them to join us. You need them to join you when you call Congress, when you're going to a rally, when you're joining a Know Your Rights training, signing a petition. You know, I am often asked as an organizer, are petitions effective? Or JJ, how many more petitions am I going to have to sign? And I want to tell you that what I tell people always is we're going to sign as many petitions as it takes until we win. And that the collectivity of us sending a clear and concise message about where we stand is what is powerful. So yes, those are important tools for us to engage on. And the power is in those numbers. And we know that this works. And as you probably have seen in the news most recently, we've seen a lot of town halls happening where a lot of folks are coming together and really pushing back and demanding a different decisions by their lawmakers to make sure that we are standing up to this moment.
At the ACLU, a constant reminder that is shared is that we can't be so distracted by the Trump administration's vision of the country that we stop doing the work to envision, to build, and to fight for our own vision for this country and to build what justice looks like. And we have to do the work to build our way out of the deep injustices and the inequities that we're facing now. And one aspect of building that infrastructure of justice is about keeping our communities healthy and safe. And in light of the attacks on transgender people and on reproductive justice, many of us are concerned for the safety and well-being of people seeking gender-affirming care or people seeking reproductive health care. So what does a safe haven look like for people seeking gender-affirming or reproductive care? What are we trying to build here?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I want to say this has been some of the most critical work that the ACLU has engaged with our affiliates across states after the Dobbs decision, really making sure that we are building support for state level policies that are preventing that government discrimination or that government intrusion into our healthcare. What this does that I think is as important as locking in the law is it also continues to push back on the stigma that the opposition is looking to create around our healthcare system and the healthcare that we get when we are seeking abortions or gender affirming care. And we have done great work with our affiliates and states, as Amol said, to pass shield laws and protections that protect people who are providing and patients who are seeking and others who may help be helpers to obtain abortion care in our states. We are looking, these laws really are meant to be put in place to make sure that the states are blocked from, that states that are seeking to put in civil or criminal repercussions from other states aren't able to do it for the doctors in the states that have these shield laws. An example you all have likely seen is that recently the AG in Louisiana, the Attorney General, criminally charged a New York doctor for prescribing medication for an abortion. And we saw immediately that the governor of New York stood up and made a statement that was clear and very public that she would not extradite this doctor. So standing up from our pro-healthcare governors is critical at this time, both in passing these shield laws and frankly then publicly enforcing them and really drawing the line in the sand. We've seen a lot of the role of attorneys general as well in our states. You know, again, the New York Attorney General told hospitals to continue transgender healthcare after Trump's executive order. You can imagine after we see these executive orders, there's so much fear and misinformation that is floating around that really, again, is the point. And so it's really critical that we see folks in positions of power stand up and help enforce that not in my state. We're going to make sure that people have access to this healthcare. And as Nahal mentioned, there was a case filed and we recently against the executive order that Trump put in place to stop transgender healthcare for minors. And we recently, in that case, were able to get a nationwide restraining order, again, nationwide. So this really keeps that healthcare in effect, and we want to keep getting that information out.
Yeah.
And really, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that it is all that you're describing is really powerful work. And I don't want to interrupt, but we are running a little short on time. And
Yep, let's keep going.
time for Q&A, as I promised. But before we get
Absolutely.
into Q&A, we received a lot of questions before the event asking what we can do on the ground. So for instance, Louise had a good idea about creating local community discussion sessions or workshops. So I'd love if you would really briefly share what the ACLU is doing to help us all speak up, to take action, and to be able to build firewalls in our own communities.
Thank you for that. And I love that idea. That's exactly what we need to be doing, is having those discussions in our community. And you can join one of our Know Your Rights trainings that we are having. In fact, we're having the first all Spanish Know Your Immigration Rights against mass deportation tonight. And we're continually having these. If you sign up for People Power, you'll see our invitations that really go over what we as Americans are protected by in the U.S. Constitution, and are extending to immigrants in this country, to make sure that we feel empowered to stand up and protest at this time. I also wanted to mention a current action that we have. As Amol said, and as Nahal referred to, we want to make sure that we are also seeing Congress not support actions that punish states like New Jersey or Colorado, where I sit, for protecting their citizens. And so we have an action that we're going to drop in the chat. We are seeing an attack on these sanctuary cities in Congress, and you all can take action on that directly today to connect with your legislators and tell them absolutely not. We are holding these constant Know Your Rights trainings at least monthly, but right now the demand has been so high that y'all, we've been doing them pretty much weekly, sometimes twice a week. And our next one is coming up on the 3rd of March after the All Spanish training tonight. This is a place to make sure that you bring your friends and family, and that we all together collectively know exactly what we can do. And I'll just say, while you're connecting with your reps, go ahead and add them to your favorites in your phone. I have mine in my favorites because a lot of what we're going to be doing is calling them. We're going to call them constantly and send clear messages about what our expectation is, and send those messages also to the Trump administration. We really need to show that the Trump administration, when they're doing these cruel bans or different executive orders, are out of alignment with where the American people are. And we need to make sure that they're hearing that message from us consistently, constantly, and in big numbers.
Great. I always love your energy. It is so motivating, and very much appreciate you. And I think with that, we're ready to shift to Q&A. We received a flood of pre-submitted questions from all of you, but everyone here should feel free to use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you have. And just a reminder to the journalists among us that this is off the record, and nothing here should be used for attribution or citation. And with that, Makiba, could you please share the first batch of questions for us?
Yes. So as you mentioned, Deborah, there was quite a few, and I have a few questions for the panel here today. First, with Amol, what are other ways we can get involved and gather in our own communities? Then JJ, how does the recent executive orders targeting trans people affect the outcome of the Scrimeti case? And then a question for Amol and Nahal, how do we combat Trump's deportations?
So the question to me, thank you for that, Makiba. The question to me was about what are other ways in which people can get involved. Look, I just want to zoom out for a second and point out the fact that there is a sentiment right now that people are giving up, or that they are hiding under the covers. We cannot be resigned. The Trump administration and those that are emboldened by it are counting on us to be resigned. But the ACLU and our communities are counting on you to be reignited. So the things that I'm telling anybody that is interested in getting out there is reach out to your affiliates, first of all, support them, and give them the time and energy that they need right now, because we all need it. Secondly, I would say call your lawmakers. There have been references to different things that we can take action on right now. But what I'm telling people to do is, look, do not allow Congress or your representatives to build the infrastructure for Trump's mass deportation agenda. I'm making sure that our team is reaching out to our representatives at the federal level and at the state level constantly, and that we are making our voices heard. And I'll say, there's a reference to the Know Your Rights work that's happening across the country right now. Pretty much every single ACLU affiliate is honing in on Know Your Rights right now. We know that there are communities across the country that really need to understand what their rights are because they are vulnerable. And so we are building up our community engagement so that we can do Know Your Rights trainings across the country. And I'll say lastly that every single affiliate that is doing Know Your Rights work right now is inundated with requests. We are inundated with requests. We have dozens and dozens of requests, and we're trying to fill them as fast as we can. Lastly, I'll mention one thing, which is that New Jersey and Virginia are the only two states with gubernatorial elections this year. We're facing an election in the year after Donald Trump's reelection, and I think it's really important to get engaged wherever you can on that front as well. So I'll pause there and turn it over to JJ.
Thank you, Amol. So this is an excellent question, and we've heard it a lot. And just for folks who may not know, because Skrmetti is a weird name from an attorney general in Tennessee. The Skrmetti case is the ACLU and Lambda Legal's challenge to the Tennessee law that banned gender-affirming care for minors. And so that case has wound its way through the courts, and it was heard by the U.S. Supreme Court on December 4th and argued by our very own Chase Strangio of the LGBTQ HIV Project at the ACLU, the first transgender attorney to argue in front of the Supreme Court. So listen, the results of the presidential election don't change the issue at the core of this case. And even though we have seen that the Department of Justice has indeed switched sides from challenging Tennessee's law to supporting it, we also saw that they did not ask for it to be dismissed. And so this will proceed to decision, which we expect in the late spring, early summer. Usually in June is when we see these types of decisions. And this case is moving forward because the plaintiffs we represent, the families and doctors fighting for their right to practice and access essential medical care, have brought this case. And there's a dispute for the Supreme Court to resolve, regardless of who is running the Department of Justice. And so we know that, the election results make the stakes even higher. And we know that the Trump administration intends to continue to target transgender people and their health care. And so the decision in this case will likely have implications for both those state and federal attacks. But we also know that the state of Tennessee was wrong in this instance, and certainly that this is unconstitutional, which is why we took it to the Supreme Court.
I'll jump in and say, in terms of the mass deportation questions, despite what it says, ICE does rely a lot on local law enforcement to provide security and support for actually carrying out those mass raids or at-large arrest operations. And at the same time, it's state and local actors who also have authority. Now, that's varies state by state, but they do have the authority to prevent officials from collaborating with ICE. These have been measures that have proliferated since the 1980s, and especially during the Trump first term. And as Amol shared, we are scaling up at the ACLU our Know Your Rights work. Now, despite what they might be saying on various news pieces, we all have the right to share truthful, lawfully obtained information about law enforcement, and we all have the right to tell people about their legal rights. And that is what we are sticking to in this moment.
I'll just add on to that. Look, the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution says that state resources cannot be commandeered for federal purposes. So states cannot be forced into doing the federal government's dirty work, including immigration enforcement. And so when the Trump administration is threatening funding or saying that they're going to go after states or prosecute people, there is a long line of case law and doctrine that says that states are well within their constitutional rights to make sure that state resources are going towards state purposes and not towards federal immigration enforcement. So that's another thing that I wanted to echo here, because I think state leaders need to know that. They cannot cower right now. They cannot shy away and look away and try to bury their heads. We need strong state leadership across the country to say, look, if you're going to go after our communities, it's not going to be on our dime. It's not going to be on our watch. And that's what I hope attorneys generals and governors can step up to do.
Makiba, do we have another question that we can slip in the last 2 minutes?
Yes, I'm going to try to slip in two. Okay, so the first one from Ayana W. How are you thinking about being strategic regarding who brings what cases and how many people are suing against the same executive orders? And then we received similar questions from a number of people today. Some are around law enforcement. How do you enforce court rulings if the administration ignores them or if Trump has the power to pardon?
I can start with the litigation one. I'm not an attorney, but our attorneys are brilliant and are coordinating behind the scenes around the ways that they will uplift their personal perspectives and standings and the plaintiffs who are filing against these types of unlawful executive actions. For example, it is no coincidence that the ACLU sued against the birthright executive action, and we had state attorneys general also join and claim that this was unlawful. So we are seeing incredible coordination behind the scenes to really uplift the unlawful nature of a number of these attacks that are being proliferated by the Trump administration.
I'll just say one more thing, which is the importance of state court litigation right now. Of course, we are doing whatever we can to fight back on the federal level against the executive orders and all of the injustices that we're seeing there. But it's important to make sure that we are doing rights preserving work in state courts across the country. And the ACLU nationwide has an emphasis on state Supreme Court litigation. And my team here at the ACLU of New Jersey has been doing a lot of work. We appear before the state Supreme Court of New Jersey more than most other parties in the state. And we take a rights expansive view in the state. And so when we can't rely on the federal government to protect and defend and expand our rights, we need to look to state leaders, and that's another avenue for us to do so.
Great. Well, I think we are out of time. I thank you all so much for joining us today and sharing your questions. And thank you to Amol, JJ, and Nahal for taking the time to answer all of these questions so thoughtfully, but more importantly, for doing the work so thoughtfully. And thank you to Makiba for convening us all. It's clear that the road ahead is going to be long and tough and tiring and heartbreaking. In this uncertain time, what gives me a morale boost, as I said earlier, is reminding myself about the work of the ACLU and the ACLU's unique strengths. Our legal, policy, and organizing expertise really is unmatched, and it spans across issue areas like no other organization. And it also brings me peace and comfort knowing we have supporters like all of you that are bolstering the fight. All of you, alongside our staff of lawyers and organizers and our volunteers, and millions of activists on the ground, truly makes this work possible, and we are stronger together. And we are grateful to have all of you in this fight with us. If we weren't able to answer any of your questions, please feel free to email us at leadershipforum@aclu.org, and we look forward to staying in touch and staying engaged. Thank you.